Edge of Vengeance. Chapter 1. The Return. Detective Ryan Calloway had always believed that some cases never truly ended. The Steele murders, as they were infamously known, had haunted his career and mind for over a decade. 3 brutal killings, each more gruesome than the last, left the city gripped in fear. And then, just as abruptly as they started, they stopped. The killer vanished, leaving behind nothing but the faint smell of unfinished business and a pile of unsolved mysteries. On a rainy Friday evening, as Ryan was about to leave his office, a single manila envelope was slid under his door. The envelope was unmarked, its edges creased, and Ryan's name scrawled in red ink. Inside was a photograph, grainy and dark, but unmistakable. It showed the first victim of the Steele murders, Mary Connors, a young woman whose life was cruelly taken one icy night in November. But this photograph was different from the crime scene photos buried in the case files. In this picture, Mary was alive, staring into the camera with a hollow expression, and the timestamp showed yesterday's date. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the photo. It was impossible. Mary had been dead for years, yet here she was, her gaze hauntingly familiar. As he flipped the photo over, he found a short message on the back. Asterisk, I'm back. New game, new rules. Catch me if you can. Asterisk. The killer had returned. Ryan knew this was no prank. This was real, deadly real. The city, his team, and every decision he made were about to come under fire once again. But this time, it felt personal. Whoever this killer was, they weren't just back to kill, they wanted to destroy Ryan piece by piece. He grabbed his coat and rushed out into the pouring rain. The hunt was back on. And this time, there was more than just justice on the line. There was vengeance. The dark clouds swirled above as Ryan made his way to the only person who could help him reopen this nightmare. An old informant who had gone silent after the last murder. He hadn't heard from her in years, but if anyone knew where the killer would strike next, it was her. His mind raced with memories of the case that had nearly destroyed him. He couldn't let this ghost from the past ruin more lives. Not again. But the more Ryan unraveled, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about the past murders. The killer was playing a new game, and Ryan had no idea what the rules were. Chapter 2. An old ally. The door to the rundown apartment creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit hallway filled with the stench of cigarettes and mold. Ryan followed the familiar trail down to the last door on the left, where he knew she'd be hiding out. Lydia Hayes, once his most reliable source, had vanished after the Steele case went cold. She'd promised to never get involved with the ghost killer again. But things had changed now. If the killer was truly back, Lydia's life could be in as much danger as anyone else's. He knocked on the door 3 times, an old code they used during the height of the investigation. For a moment, there was only silence, then the faint sound of shuffling behind the door. It opened just enough for Ryan to see Lydia's narrowed eyes peering out. Her face was worn from years of hard living, but the spark of intelligence in her eyes hadn't faded. "Detective Calloway," she muttered, pulling the door open wider. "I was hoping I'd never see you again." "Likewise," Ryan replied with a wry smile. "But I think you know why I'm here." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she motioned for him to come in. The apartment was cluttered and reeked of neglect. Old newspapers, empty bottles, and cigarette butts littered every surface. Ryan's eyes swept the room as he took a seat on the only clear spot on the worn-out couch. "Tell me, Lydia," Ryan began, leaning forward. "What do you know about this?" He handed her the photograph of Mary Connors. Her expression remained unreadable, but her fingers trembled as she held the picture. She stared at it for a long time, her brow furrowing deeper with every passing second. "He's back," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I knew this day would come." Ryan's heart sank. He needed answers, not cryptic fear. "Who is he? You were closer to him than anyone. You must know something." Lydia shook her head slowly. I don't know who he is. I never did. But he was obsessed with the Steele murders, like it was his masterpiece. And you were the one that got away. He won't let that slide this time. If he's back, he's come to finish the job. Ryan leaned back, trying to piece it together. Finish what job? She stared at him with eyes full of despair. Destroying you. A chill ran down Ryan's spine. This was no longer about catching a killer, it was about survival. The game had indeed changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Before Lydia could say more, the sudden screech of tires outside the apartment caught their attention. Ryan's instincts kicked in as he sprang to the window. A black car was speeding away, its taillights disappearing into the night. But it was the unmistakable flash of a camera from across the street that made his blood run cold. They were being watched. Get down! Ryan yelled, pulling Lydia to the floor just as a deafening shot shattered the window. The killer was close, closer than they had ever imagined. Ryan had to get out of there, and fast. But as he dragged Lydia towards the door, one thought burned in his mind. They were no longer hunting a ghost. This time, the ghost was hunting them. Chapter 3. The game begins. The apartment was swarming with officers by the time Ryan and Lydia were safely escorted out. Flashing lights painted the rain-soaked street in streaks of red and blue, a grim reminder that danger was never far away. The bullet that had shattered the window was now lodged in the wall, inches from where Lydia's head had been moments before. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they had just barely escaped the killer's opening move. But why? Why not take the shot to end it all right there? The answer chilled Ryan to his core, because the killer was playing with them, dragging out the fear, enjoying the suspense. This wasn't about getting rid of him quickly. It was about making him suffer, tearing apart everything he held dear piece by piece. We need to move you somewhere safe, Ryan said firmly to Lydia as they sat in the back of his car, away from the commotion. Safe? Lydia scoffed, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. There's no safe place from him, and you know it. The only reason I'm still breathing is because he wants me to be part of the show. Ryan didn't disagree. He could feel it too. This was just the beginning. The killer's eyes were on them, watching every move, waiting for the next chance to strike. And Ryan knew he couldn't protect Lydia alone. He needed his team back in play, the people he trusted most. An hour later, they arrived at the precinct, where Ryan's longtime partner, Detective Michelle Graves, was waiting. Michelle was sharp, tough, and had been by Ryan's side during the original Steele investigation. If anyone could help him piece together this twisted puzzle, it was her. Michelle's eyes widened as she saw Lydia step out of the car. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she said, her voice edged with suspicion. Neither did I, Lydia muttered, blowing smoke into the night air. But here we are. Your ghost is back. Inside the precinct, they gathered around the conference room table, spreading out the old case files alongside the new photograph. Ryan filled Michelle in on everything. How the killer had resurfaced, the photograph of Mary Connors, and the attack at Lydia's apartment. As they talked, the tension in the room grew thicker, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on them. Michelle leaned back, arms crossed, studying the evidence. So we know he's taunting us, but what's his next move? He always left clues before, twisted little breadcrumbs leading us closer to his game. Maybe this photo is another clue. Or a trap, Lydia added darkly. He's smarter than before. He's been waiting, planning, evolving. Ryan nodded, eyes fixed on the photo. That's what worries me. He's not just going after random victims this time. He's targeting people connected to the original case. People like you, Lydia. A shiver ran through the room. Lydia's face paled, and she dropped her cigarette, grinding it under her heel. Then you better be ready for what's coming next, because he's already decided who's going to die first. Before Ryan could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. The screen flashed with an unknown number. He answered cautiously, half expecting silence or a distorted voice. Instead, he was greeted by the faint sound of breathing, then a low chuckle that made his skin crawl. "Detective Calloway," the voice rasped. "I see you've gathered the old team, but this time you're out of your league. The game has started, and you're already losing." "Who is this?" Ryan demanded, his grip tightening on the phone. "You know who I am," the voice hissed. "But let's make it interesting. I'll give you a clue. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock's running out for one of you tonight. Better figure out who before it's too late." The line went dead. Ryan's pulse raced as he relayed the conversation to Michelle and Lydia. The killer was toying with them, but he'd also given them a hint. One of them was next. But who? And how much time did they have? "Michelle, run a trace on that call. Now," Ryan ordered. But they both knew it was unlikely to lead anywhere. The room was charged with adrenaline as they scrambled to figure out the next move. Time was ticking away, and the killer's taunt hung over them like a dark cloud. Somewhere in the city, a clock was counting down to someone's death, and they had no idea where to start looking. Lydia's eyes darted nervously to the door. "We have to go. We need to hide." "No," Ryan said firmly. "If we run, he'll pick us off one by one. We need to stay together and think. He's giving us a chance to stop it, we just need to figure out the clue." But as Ryan said the words, doubt gnawed at him. This wasn't just a game, it was a trap, meticulously designed to tear them apart, and they were walking right into it. And then it hit him. Tick-tock. A clock, but not just any clock. There was only one place it could be, tied directly to the Steele murders. The old abandoned clock tower where the final victim was found all those years ago. "Get your gear," Ryan said, his voice steady but urgent. "We're heading to the clock tower. He's waiting for us." Michelle and Lydia exchanged worried glances but followed his lead. They knew they had no choice but to confront the killer on his terms, at his chosen location. But as they sped towards the tower, Ryan couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that they were heading straight into a carefully laid trap. And this time, it wasn't just about catching a killer, it was about who would survive the night. Chapter 4. The Trap Springs. The clock tower loomed in the distance like a dark sentinel against the night sky. Its decaying structure had been left to rot after the Steele murders, standing as a grim monument to the case that was never solved. The air was thick with tension as Ryan, Michelle, and Lydia approached the entrance. The ancient clock hands were frozen at 3:15, the exact time the final victim's heart had stopped beating. Ryan's instincts were on high alert as they stepped inside the tower, flashlights cutting through the shadows. The creak of old wood and the drip of water echoed ominously, making every sound feel like a threat. They moved cautiously up the winding staircase, each step groaning under their weight. "I don't like this," Michelle whispered, her eyes scanning the darkness above. "It's too quiet." Ryan nodded. "Stay sharp. He's here, somewhere." As they reached the top of the staircase, they found themselves in a large, circular chamber where the old clock mechanism was still partially intact. Rusted gears and broken chains littered the floor. In the center of the room was a single chair, and tied to it was a figure slumped over, motionless. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. "Is it?" Lydia's voice wavered. They edged closer, flashlights trembling as they illuminated the figure. It was a mannequin, dressed in a blood-stained hoodie, with a clock strapped to its chest. The clock was ticking down, the numbers glowing in the dark. 0:05, 00:04, 00:03. "It's a bomb!" Michelle screamed, grabbing Lydia and pulling her towards the staircase. Ryan's pulse raced as the clock hit 0. The explosion ripped through the chamber, a deafening roar that shook the entire tower. Ryan was thrown backward, crashing against the wall as debris rained down. The world spun, his ears ringing as dust and smoke filled the air. He tried to push himself up, but pain shot through his arm, probably broken. Through the chaos, he heard Michelle's voice, faint but urgent. "Ryan, get up. We have to move." Ryan staggered to his feet, coughing through the smoke. The killer had played them perfectly, drawing them into a trap and nearly burying them alive. But as the dust settled, he realized something was missing: Lydia. She wasn't with them. "Where's Lydia?" Ryan shouted, fear clawing at him. Michelle's eyes widened in horror as she looked around. "She was right behind me." Panic surged through Ryan. Lydia was their key witness, and now she was gone. But something else caught his eye. Spray painted on the wall in large red letters was a message. "TikTok. Too late, detective. Now it's personal." Ryan's blood ran cold. The killer had taken Lydia, and this was no longer about playing games. This was about finishing the job he started years ago. The explosion was just the beginning, a distraction. The real plan was far more sinister. Ryan clenched his fists, fighting back the rising tide of despair. The clock was ticking down again, and now it wasn't just about solving the case. It was about saving a life. Chapter 5. The Final Warning. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Ryan and Michelle managed to get out of the tower just as backup arrived, the chaos of the explosion echoing in the night. The SWAT team secured the area, but the killer had already vanished, leaving behind nothing but taunts and a trail of destruction. Lydia was gone, and time was running out to save her. Back at the precinct, Ryan's mind raced. Every second ticked away like a countdown in his head. The killer had been ahead of them at every turn, orchestrating the night's events with surgical precision. And now he had Lydia, the one person who could potentially identify him. Ryan knew that whatever the killer's endgame was, it involved her and him directly. Michelle slammed a file down on the desk. "We've cross-checked all known associates of the original victims, ex-cons, and suspects who fit the profile. We've got nothing. He's a ghost." Ryan ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. "He's been in the shadows for years, perfecting his plan. He wants us to chase our tails while he executes the final act." Michelle leaned in closer, her voice tight. "Then let's change the game. What if we bait him?" Ryan looked up sharply. "How?" "We use you. He's obsessed with you, Ryan. Every move he's made tonight is designed to drag you back into this nightmare. If we give him what he wants, a direct confrontation, you might be able to draw him out. But it's risky. You'd be putting yourself in the crosshairs." Ryan didn't hesitate. "If it means getting Lydia back and ending this, I'm in." Michelle nodded, determination hardening her features. "We stage it somewhere public but controlled. A location where we have backup and exits covered. We make it look like you're alone, like you're desperate. He won't be able to resist showing up to finish you himself." As they finalized the plan, a sense of urgency gripped them both. They knew they were running out of time, and the killer was counting on their desperation. But it was the only shot they had left. The chosen location was an old railway station on the edge of town, long abandoned and shrouded in darkness. It was the kind of place that felt forgotten by time, a fitting battleground for a showdown between hunter and hunted. As the team set up surveillance and positioned themselves discreetly, Ryan prepared himself for what was to come. He was the bait, the lure that would hopefully draw the killer out into the open. Hours ticked by as Ryan stood alone under the flickering light of the station platform, the night air thick with tension. He could feel the weight of the shadows pressing in, as if the entire world held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Every creak, every distant sound set his nerves on edge. But there was no sign of the killer. Then, out of the darkness, a single text message buzzed on his phone. It was from Lydia's number. "You look lost, detective. So close, yet so far. Look behind you." Ryan's heart skipped as he spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty platform and the echo of his own footsteps. He knew it was a trap, but he also knew he had no choice but to play along. The killer wanted him off balance, paranoid, afraid. A second message appeared. "Last chance, Calloway. Meet me where it all ended before. Just you and me. Or she dies. Ryan's grip tightened on the phone. He knew exactly where the killer was leading him. The abandoned warehouse where the final victim of the Steele murders had been found. The place was crawling with bad memories and unanswered questions. And now it would be the site of their final confrontation. He signaled to Michelle, who was hidden nearby. He's taking me to the warehouse. Keep the team close but out of sight. We can't afford to spook him. Michelle's eyes were filled with concern, but she nodded. Just be careful, Ryan. He's more dangerous than ever. With that, Ryan headed out into the night, racing toward the place where everything had begun, and where it all might end. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking shadow against the skyline, its broken windows like dark, empty eyes. The air was thick with decay and rust, the smell of forgotten death. As he stepped inside, the creaking of metal and the whisper of wind filled the void. And then he heard it, a low, taunting laugh that echoed through the cavernous space. The killer was here. Welcome back, Detective. The voice called out from the darkness. It's been too long. Did you miss me? Ryan's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, but the shadows seemed to dance and twist, hiding the threat. He kept his hand near his weapon, ready for anything. Let's finish this, Ryan shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls. It's just you and me now. Show yourself. The laugh came again, closer this time. Oh, we're far from finished. But first, you need to see something. A flicker of light caught Ryan's attention. At the far end of the warehouse, a single spotlight snapped on, illuminating a chair, and tied to it was Lydia, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. Her mouth was gagged, her hands bound tightly. She struggled weakly, but the bonds held her in place. Lydia! Ryan took a step forward, but the killer's voice cut him off. Not so fast. One wrong move and she's dead before you can blink. You see, I've planned this moment for years. I knew you'd come. I knew you couldn't resist. But now, I want to savor it. The look on your face when you realize you've lost. The figure finally emerged from the shadows. A man wearing a mask, a grotesque distortion of a human face. The killer's eyes gleamed with malevolent joy as he circled Lydia like a predator toying with its prey. I've taken everything from you, Calloway, the killer snarled. Your peace, your career, your sanity. And now I'll take the last piece. You'll watch her die knowing you failed. But as the killer raised a blade, ready to strike, Ryan's training kicked in. He drew his weapon, aiming with steady hands, his voice cold and controlled. You move 1 inch and I'll put you down. For a split second, everything hung in the balance. The killer's hand poised above Lydia, Ryan's finger on the trigger, and the world teetering on the edge of violence. But the killer simply smiled beneath the mask. Let's see who's faster, Detective. Are you willing to risk it? Ryan's mind raced, searching for a way out. For a way to save Lydia without giving the killer what he wanted. He couldn't lose her, not after everything they'd been through. But time was slipping away, and the killer's blade was inching closer. He had to make a move, but one wrong step could cost Lydia her life. The final showdown was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Last Move. In the cold silence of the warehouse, Ryan felt the weight of every decision pressing down on him. The killer's eyes gleamed behind that grotesque mask, savoring the tension, reveling in the power he held over them both. Lydia's muffled whimpers cut through the darkness, fueling Ryan's desperation. He needed to think quickly, but he also knew that this monster wanted him to act rashly, to slip up, to give him the satisfaction of watching everything fall apart. Ryan's mind raced as he kept his gun trained on the killer. He had to outsmart him to anticipate his next move. But this wasn't just a criminal. It was a sadist who had been planning this moment for years. Every step, every decision, every fear had been calculated. Ryan wasn't dealing with just a man. He was dealing with a force of chaos, someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by watching him suffer. And then it hit him. The killer's greatest weakness was also his pride. He thrived on control, on manipulation. If Ryan could turn that against him, he might create just enough of an opening to save Lydia. "Is this it?" Ryan called out, his voice steely, even as his heart pounded in his chest. "Is this your big finish? Hiding behind a mask, using a helpless woman as a shield? You think this makes you powerful? You're nothing but a coward." The killer stiffened, his grip on the knife tightening. The words were digging into his ego, needling the arrogance that fueled his need to dominate. For a moment, Ryan saw a flicker of rage behind the mask, the carefully crafted control starting to fray. "You think you can provoke me?" The killer snarled, his voice cracking. "You think you're in control here? I hold all the cards, Calloway. This is my game, and I decide how it ends." "Then show me," Ryan shouted back, stepping forward. "Face me like a man. No more hiding, no more games, just you and me. Let her go, and we finish this." The killer hesitated. Ryan could see the internal struggle, the temptation to give in to the challenge. The thrill of direct confrontation was pulling at the monster's need to prove his superiority. Ryan's plan was working, but it was a razor's edge. He was gambling with Lydia's life, and he knew it. Finally, with a slow, deliberate movement, the killer lowered the knife. He stepped away from Lydia, allowing a few precious feet of distance between them. "You want a face-off, detective? Fine. But if you make a single wrong move, she dies." Ryan didn't let his focus waver. He needed the killer to fully commit, to step just far enough away from Lydia so that she would be out of immediate danger. He could feel the tension in the air crackling like electricity, the final moments of a deadly chess match where one misstep would spell disaster. "You've been obsessed with this for years," Ryan said, inching closer. "You could have killed me a dozen times, but you didn't. You wanted me alive so you could watch me break. But now it's you who's losing control. You're afraid to end it because, deep down, I'm the one who's going to win." The taunt struck home. The killer's composure shattered, and with a roar of fury, he charged at Ryan, knife raised. But that was the opening Ryan had been waiting for. In one swift, practiced motion, he fired a shot directly at the killer's shoulder, causing the man to stumble and drop the knife. Before the killer could recover, Ryan was on him, tackling him to the ground with all his strength. The gun clattered out of reach as they struggled, both men fighting with raw, brutal intensity. The killer clawed and lashed out, trying to regain control, but Ryan's fury was unstoppable. This was everything, the culmination of years of torment, of loss, of sleepless nights haunted by those unsolved murders. He wasn't just fighting for Lydia or for justice, he was fighting for his own redemption. With one final surge of strength, Ryan pinned the killer down, his fist colliding with the mask until it cracked and finally shattered, revealing the face beneath. It was a face that Ryan had never seen before, but one that was twisted with malice and hatred, an embodiment of the evil that had been stalking him for years. The killer's eyes blazed with defiance, even as blood dripped from his lips. "Go ahead, Calloway. End it. You'll never escape me. You'll always be haunted by this. You'll never know peace." Ryan's hand trembled as he reached for his gun. He could end it all right here. One pull of the trigger and the nightmare would be over. But in that moment, something stopped him. This man wanted him to cross the line, to become like him, a killer driven by vengeance. And that's when Ryan knew that the only way to truly win was to deny him that satisfaction. "No," Ryan said, his voice cold and resolute. "You're going to rot in a cell for the rest of your life, watching the world forget you. You don't get the easy way out." The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as Michelle and the backup team rushed in, weapons drawn. They quickly subdued the killer, handcuffing him and dragging him away, screaming obscenities and threats as he was forced into the back of a police van. But Ryan didn't hear any of it. His focus was on Lydia, who was still tied to the chair, her eyes wide with tears of relief. He rushed over and gently untied her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's over," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're safe." Lydia clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. I thought he was going to kill me." "Not today," Ryan said, holding her close. "Not ever again." As the adrenaline faded and the reality of what they'd just survived began to set in, Ryan allowed himself a moment of peace. The killer was finally behind bars, and the ghost of the Steele murders had been exorcised at last. But deep down, Ryan knew that he would carry the scars of this night for the rest of his life. Some wounds never truly heal, but for now, there was a sense of closure, a hard-fought victory that had come at a heavy price. And as he looked out at the rising sun, casting light over the once darkened warehouse, he knew that he could finally let go of the past, at least for now. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.